Okay, so let's now jump right into the matter and give you a short introduction of the census project, but then I would also like to present to you the vision we have set out now for the last 15 months of our project, where we thought hard about how to really make progress in making scenarios accessible. And first, your introduction round has shown we have a diverse set of stakeholders here by design, and it's a very distinguished group. So we really hope for your feedback on how well we are doing in terms of our concept that we will present this morning with examples, but then also the first tools we have developed, and we are in the progress of developing, which we will then discuss later in the afternoon, and we will also have breakout groups where you can go into the details. So really looking forward to this. So, I mean, we said it frequently, so just the elevator speech for census would be really to make climate change scenarios more accessible and usable to selected user groups. So we're not trying to do everything. We focus on selected user groups. And the two things we think about here is effective means to communicate key insights. That includes visualization, but is not limited to visualization, and empowering users to explore scenario information. Because the more you have experience with that, the more you are empowered, the easier is the interaction with the experts, and the more you can do on your own. These are our two goals. And we have, let me start with the inner circle. What type of scenarios are we actually talking about? And we talk about all of them. We have climate change projections, climate impact scenarios in the project. It's here, climate impact scenarios. We have the big topic of global mitigation scenarios, and also we have these two regional case studies where we look into regional scenarios. The user groups we have selected is climate policymakers, business actors, particularly from businesses that have a long-term strategic planning horizon. Because of this large-scale investments they have to do, finance actors, and then the regional actors that we are addressing in two case studies, one from the developing world, one from the developed world. And the product we are aiming for in the end is what we call the census toolkit and the census portals. They are closely linked. We will discuss the link in a minute. And this is a collection of tools and approaches for visualization, contextualization, and co-production of knowledge. Now, there are many factors to improve scenario accessibility. These were two that we were discussing in the project quite explicitly. And there will be certainly more, but these are the two I would like to raise here. The first is really contextualization. Scenarios are such complex animals because you cannot take a single scenario and say, okay, that's a prediction, that's how the world will evolve, and so we just follow this scenario. In order to understand what you can learn from that scenario, you need to have context. You need to know what was actually the question that was behind the development of the scenario. And usually this question is explored with a number of scenarios, not with a single one. So one needs to understand what is the associated set of scenarios and what can I learn from the context as well as from the scenario. So that's one thing. And we try to bring with our tools, we try to bring in context. And the second one is that if you look at the co-production of knowledge, you really can have two distinct ways of co-producing knowledge. One is a classic one that you sit together with users and you develop scenarios jointly. You design scenarios and then the analysts are going to build them in the models and then they go back and you interact. This is done and probably should be done more. It's particular when you have regional scenario user interaction, it's often a starting point to build a joint narrative. You will now also see projects when it comes to national decarbonization pathways that there is this interaction, close interaction. It's a bit more difficult if the scenarios become more macro and you have global scenarios, because it might lack the granularity, the specificity to do this. But we do have a lot of global scenarios that link the long-term climate target with the near-term action, which are assessed by the IPC. So the second application here is how can we co-generate scenario knowledge from existing scenarios, like in the IPCC report. So not building scenarios together, but just sitting together, looking at those scenarios and jointly developing insights from those scenarios. This is an overview of our current stakeholder groups. And you can see the policymaker group, business, finance. We added for this meeting stakeholders particularly interested in the climate impact side. It was a bit of a gap beforehand, but we have a sister project called Easypedia, which we work together closely, and they have a separate stakeholder process where some of the work we do on impact can be fed in and can be also evaluated by stakeholders there. So over the course of the project, really the situation changed. Before that, we had kind of equal size policy core group and a business core group with 2 finance stakeholders. And then the policy group is still there. Many of them couldn't come today. So that's why we have the YouTube stream up there, so that colleagues from the UNFCCC, Joanna Post, and from the working group 3 of IPC can join in remotely and follow at least the presentation. So in the breakout groups, we won't have any streaming. But the other noteworthy thing is if you look on the finance side, so really turned the business panel more in a finance panel, because the interest by the finance community in mitigation scenarios and also for impact scenarios is considerable. And we feel it as a community. So we have now a very strong group in this area, which I think is very exciting. Now, just a few words on the regional stakeholder interaction. It's not the topic of this workshop, just so that you know that we have these 2 case studies. We deliberately picked one case study in a developed country, the Netherlands, and one in a developing country, Kenya. They have different topics. So on the Netherlands case study led by Caspar, it is about the renaturalization of the Vecht, which is a river basin there, and how the plans for that would be affected by both mitigation as well as climate change. And then on the Kenya side, led by Henrik and the team here at SEI, it's about the transboundary effects of climate change and climate change impacts with a focus on adaptation and building new storylines along the so-called shared socioeconomic pathways for Kenya. So these are the 2 that are also progressing, and there have been already 1 workshop in Kenya and several workshops will follow. Now we have produced by now 2 products that are already publicly available. Our first product is the so-called primer on climate change scenario approaches, or short, the climate scenario primer. And it really tries to bring to you the complex world of climate change scenarios and give you a high-level, comprehensible 15 to 30 minute, I have more 30-minute than 50-minute discussion of what is there, what the concepts are, how they link to each other. And by now it has received over 20,000 views, so it's fairly well received. So we're quite happy with that, and I think it's a good starting point to contextualize scenarios without going into detail in any individual topic. A second product we have just produced. It's right now in an unwieldy format. It's a report on relevant scenario studies. So what scenarios are actually out there for, including both regional and global ones, and co-production techniques. And we sent you this report as an attachment, as a PDF before that meeting. We are not planning to discuss it here because we have other interactive tools we would like to raise. But we are actively thinking of how to make it to disseminate it in a way that it's accessible also to stakeholders, because it has a few important elements. It's about bridging global and regional scenario approaches and also thinking about terminology. It has climate change scenario fact sheets, including the latest global ones that are, for example, in the 1.5 degree database, but also beyond, and then a scenario collection on Kenya and the Netherlands to give an example of the wealth of scenarios in the regional areas. And it has an overview on co-production techniques that is coupled to an online database of techniques. It's not online yet, it's in a spreadsheet, so I'm a bit ahead here. But
no,
it is online.
It is online.
Okay.
And the link is in the document. So if
all right.
somebody is interested in co-production,
All right.
it's really comprehensive overview.
Okay, good. And you can see here different types of methods and characterization. We're thinking of how we can structure this in a way that maybe people can select co-production techniques depending on the application. So if you have feedback on this, please approach us by email, by phone, or in the breaks, and we are very happy to receive feedback. So now with that intro into the census project overall, let me jump right into our vision. So what do we want to end up in August next year when the project is going to finish? We will have one more stakeholder workshop. Probably we will be aiming for January, February, March, so that we have enough time to wrap things up. And at this next stakeholder workshop, where we will invite you again and hope to find a good time where you will be available, we will then really do fine-tuning work of whatever we move to. But this is about strategic now visioning what should the outcome look like. So the census toolkit is the overarching concept for us to collect those visualization tools, contextualization, and co-production tools that we are planning to develop. And we would like to structure this toolkit into three pillars. One is what we call the learn pillar, the learn pillar. This is collecting modules that are about communicating scenario insights and fundamentals. Like the scenario primer would be more about fundamentals, so giving you some context to be able to better understand generally the world of scenarios, but then there should also be targeted learn models to give you an insight, for example, about a global stock take or something like that from the scenario literature. Of course, our starting point and our focus is always climate change scenarios. Then the second pillar is explore. So once you have gone through that, or if you are already a bit of an expert user, you can jump into these modules that give you some ability to explore scenario spaces and do some of this yourself, or in a co-production setting where you would have a workshop where you interactively with a scenario expert can go through these scenario data. And the third pillar is share. So this is share modules should allow users to disseminate self-generated scenario information. So if you generate some insights and you want to give a presentation and want to have a graph from these tools, you could put this on a PowerPoint, just to give you an example. So we have more thinking to do about this share column. We did quite a lot of thinking on the learn and explore column. Now, here's a graphical depiction of these three columns or three pillars, and Boris, following right after me, will talk more about the design and give you examples. But it's really this step from key insights, executive summaries, to exploration tools, to user presentation and dissemination tools, and then in each of these pillars, you would have several modules that you could choose from. Examples for a learn module is a scenario primer. So that is about fundamentals. We will talk about other learn modules during this meeting, and so Boris will address those. The second one, the explore modules, we plan to separate into two items because there's a number of explore modules already out there. So in principle, we also think of this toolkit as something that could be extended after the lifetime of census, that others add tools to it. We would like to distinguish between open explore modules and so-called guided explore modules. Open explore modules is something that can be anything and can, for example, be a graphical user interface to a database. So it's fairly open. The guided explore module is a bit more structured. It's ideally is tied to a learn module and gives you then a limited set of explorative possibilities to kind of enable you walking through these scenario spaces. Let me give you examples. One open explore module is not developed by census, it's just put in census terminology. This is the scenario explorer that is attached to the 1.5 degree database. That's already out there. You can go to the 1.5 degree database, which was put together in the context of the 1.5 degree special report, and then go through these spaces, these scenario spaces. You have these workspaces where you can look at any data, and we will have a presentation by Daniel about this later on. It gives you all the possibilities. It gives you zero guidance how to look at it. In contrast, In contrast, the guided explore modules would, well, you might want to dispute that. That was a provocative statement, but so the guided explore modules, or short GEMs, they're really trying to limit your choice here and bring you in from a topic perspective, and then look at some scenario model variable combinations for key sensitivities that are relevant to explore for the topic, but really would limit the complexity and dimensionality of the space, and would also include relevant metadata and information so that you really can learn from the exploration and explore yourself or together with an expert. So that's the idea here for this guided explore modules. And so both learn models and explore models will be topic of today. And I'm moving on to my last set of slides, the last concept, which is about the concept of portals and how it links to toolkit. So portals is basically a collection of a subset of tools from the toolkit along a certain topic that this portal, or a certain user group, I should say, that this portal is going to address. While the toolkit can be fairly unstructured, you go onto this page and you have all the different tools, then you can pick whatever you need. The portal would give you more guidance. It would only show you a subset for a specific user group of modules that are relevant for a set of key questions for this user group. And we think of two portals that would be modeled as subsets of the toolkit. One is a climate policy portal. And this climate policy portal should collect those modules with relevant scenario information on implementing the Paris Agreement nationally and globally, because that's a key question of stakeholders in this area. And that is the idea here. And the second portal we are thinking of is a finance portal, which is about scenario information on physical and transition risk, investment opportunities, and alignment that would be relevant for providers of financial disclosures, but also users of financial disclosures and regulators and the finance sector as a whole. These are the two types of portals that we would like to build up. So technically, and Boris will go in more details, basically you do have that overall toolkit with the three pillars. You have all kinds of audiences here. You could add some other tools from other projects into here if they are useful. And then we select these subsets and bind them together in a portal, one for policy makers, one for finance actors, in order to give them, to their question, a more selective access. And finally, my last slide, something we would like to discuss with you today. What should be topics for these learn modules that we are planning to establish that would be important to cover in order to come up with some, it doesn't need to be totally comprehensive, but some comprehensiveness in the policy and finance portals. We want to make sure to cover the key topics and not leave out a really critical one. So I give you an overview of what we are thinking of right now, what we are doing right now. We have basically made among ourselves a list of topics. And then what we do when we develop a learn model, we say, okay, we will work on this topic. We have a design expert working here. We have a domain expert working here. They start off in a tandem to build that module. And then there's a kickoff among ourselves. There's a milestone meeting where we get feedback from the consortium. And then there is the stakeholder workshop where we will bring to you the progress where we are at. Therefore, we have the breakout groups and get your feedback. So on the policy side, we have two learn models we are working on right now. One is on the global stocktake. One is on the national and sectoral decarbonization pathways. And this one is very early on, so we will focus on the global stocktake module in the breakout group. And then on our list, those are modules on our list that we didn't start yet and where we are not sure, we will ask for your guidance, is demand side measures and their impact as a further topic, and land transition as another topic. There are 3 dots here, meaning there could be more. Maybe our list is not complete. On the finance side, we are currently working on a module on transition risk. So that will be presented in the other breakout group. And then there's, of course, the topic of investment opportunities and alignment, which is a separate important topic. And again, there may be more. We have also some learn modules that are relevant for both. So there's no problem with having one module in both portals. And one we have already developed is the Climate Change Scenario Primer, which we will definitely attach to both. And then We will tomorrow talk about what we do on the impact side, so particularly with a focus on extreme events. This is, of course, also a learn model that might be relevant for policy and finance. So this is what I had.